How's the camera?
You go higher.
I think you have to be here to get me on camera. No, you actually have to be here.
Yeah. Is Betsy on camera?
Yes.
But you're not.
Don't move.
We're ready to go.
Yeah, well, thank you for this invitation. It wasn't really an invitation, we sort of gate crashed your place. Just because Betsy happened to be in the UK. I gave a talk here about a month ago. My name is Clive Adams, and the talk I gave was called Nature to the Power of Art, and I'm the director of an organisation called Centre for Contemporary Art and the Natural World. And we have a close working relationship, hopefully getting closer and closer, with Bath Spa University, and our Art and Ecology Library is in the process of being transferred to the university. Once it's all sort of catalogued. When I was here last, I mentioned in reference to your practice as mostly landscape architect, our last big project, which was called Soil Culture, which was the largest UK contribution to the International Year of Soils. We've got one copy here in the library. Here's another one for any other practice that wants it. I'll leave it there, and if anybody wants any more, let me know, and we'll find some way of putting it to you. But you can pass it around, whatever. Yesterday, Betsy, to give you a talk in Stroud tomorrow, and yesterday she was interviewed by people from this magazine, Cyway. And I don't know, are you members of Cyway?
We are members of Cyway.
Well, it's they've had a new editor about 2 years ago, and there are now, the most substantial features on the arts, landscape architecture, and the way in which it engages with environmental issues in this. So I would recommend that you think of, this is a very good article written by a chap called me. And they've done an interview with Betsy, which is going to be published very, very soon. Now, you may think, looking at our ages, that we've known each other for ages, we're lifelong friends, and we go back 7 years. I only met this woman last year. Yeah. So I'm as interested as you are in learning more about her. It was in connection with an organisation called the Global Network of Water Museums, which has only been going a couple of years. We advise them on their artistic, the way in which the arts can help them engage with their public in different ways. And last year, Betsy turned up in the Netherlands at the conference. She wasn't actually on the panel, and I was looking through all the different people that were attending, and I didn't know. And then there's this person called Elizabeth Damon. I said, my God, that must be Betsy. She just never called Elizabeth.
No, I just have to do it.
So I quickly appropriated her onto our panel, given that she'd come all the way from New York, and we met each other there. She's staying with us. She's done so many different things, and you'll hear about that. And it's how I can introduce you will be a complete sort of muddle. She's born in New York, from the ages of 4 to 8, lived in Turkey, returned to Washington DC. Father was the director of the US Information Agency, working in India, Africa, and the Middle East. She went to art school, did her masters at Columbia University. Spent a year. Spent a year in Japan in 1961, where she studied Japanese, Korean, and Chinese culture. She started making work with earth elements in the 1980s and with water in 1985, although she tells me that interest goes way back to the time that she was building dams and rafts at a very early age. And she's worked in China from 1995 to 2006, and until 2014, I think, and was working with the largest landscape design company in China on the Olympic Park, 2003 to 6. So, this is an example of a true pioneer, to put it bluntly. So I'm very pleased to introduce Amy Betsy Damon. Amy Betsy Damon. That's a good one.
That's very good.
Thanks,
Very
Betsy.
Well, I'm delighted to be here, and I'll probably stand up because I'm kind of animated human. I don't do very well sitting down. But I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really happy to get to know this fellow. And also a lot of people, because I got to go to a conference up in Barrow. Well, I've been a nutty person around water for 40 years. And I'm going to sort of tell you bits of the story because I can't tell you everything. But this idea I wrote down in 1990. Because we've lost that. We've lost the reality that we actually live in water. And we think we can do anything we want to water. Yet, water is the reason we're alive. Water is the reason that the biosystem that we depend on is here. And it took, how many billion years of, throwing water things at the earth and having it turn into fog and be picked back out, and finally trees came, and trees got us the actual air quality in which we can live. Now, we've destroyed 70% of the tree cover on this planet. 70%. We've destroyed very much of the water. And yet there's an illusion that, it doesn't matter. Oh, we can go make water out of salt water. We can do whatever we want to water. We can frack billions of gallons of it that are permanently radioactive. It doesn't matter. But we're in a crisis, and I'm just going to say this right now. We're in a crisis. The crisis is now. It's not next year or the year after. It's really hard to face that. Because I'm comfortable. You're still comfortable to a large degree. Everybody in this room is probably somewhat comfortable. But there's also already an awful lot of people that are not comfortable. Their islands are going underwater. Their lifestyles are impacted by the reality, and what scientists are really calling it is climate chaos. And chaos is a frightening word. Absolutely frightening. I looked up what complexity is, and complexity is order on the edge of chaos. And actually, that's what we get to create in the future, for the future of this planet. You as landscape designers, or whatever you're in, is to figure out how to keep complexity, real complexity, on the edge of chaos. Nothing else will keep this planet going. So I'll launch into a bit of stuff I know. You know many things that I don't know because of the separation even in our age. So, but I will launch into that. And I'm going to back up. What got me started is I cast 250 feet of a dry riverbed in Utah where nobody was living, but the waters were all polluted. And I went in thinking I would call this piece something about celebration of rivers. And I came out after doing this with a team of 12 people, calling it a memory of clean water. Whereupon everyone told me I was a little nutty, exaggerating, but on the cover of Time magazine in the next year or two was exactly that information. Now that's over 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Have we observed any of that reality in the US? No. Okay, so there was a piece installed in many museums, and so I went on, I committed, as a result of doing that, as I was doing it one day, I looked up at the sky. It was turning dark, that wonderful, beautiful dark blue where the stars come out, and there was the Milky Way. And I had been like this on the rocks, and I went, oh my God, that looks just like the riverbed. And then I went, everything's created and patterned by water, and I know nothing. And I'm pretty sure your education hasn't taught you a lot about water. 3 stages in a hydraulic system, that's the bare beginnings of nothing. That's just how it's computed for development. So I found this work of a Max Planck Institute in Germany. It's a microscopic photograph of a living water, and I'm just going to show you this to frame things. And dead water. You can drink the dead water, you probably do every day. It's been highly chlorinated, the microbes have been removed. It's not very good for you because you need those microbes. We're part of the biome, and you would think we're not. And that's what makes people sick, if you don't have enough. And this is patterned this way because of the microbes. So, and that looked to me like something growing. It's growing, right? If you took the next, it would move and change and everything like that. And I got very excited by that. So many years later, I found the work of Mei-Wan Ho. And for those of you that are very curious about the meaning of life and creation of life, it's good looking at her books. They're very scholarly. The first one is The Rainbow and the Worm. But every single life form has a complete crystal in it at Genesis. Imagine that. Just imagine the truth of that. And so her book, if you read chapter 1 and the final chapter, or a couple of chapters, you get what it is. She and a few scientists have figured out that the meaning of life exists in water. It is in water. Our brains are conscious because of water. Our hearts are beating not because they're a magic pump, but because water moves in a vortex motion that somehow figured out in creating us how to distribute exactly what's right to every part of our bodies. Now, a pump didn't do that, okay? Water did that. So I was very excited to meet her. She unfortunately died of cancer. She was here right in London. This is just an early work where I printed stones on lithographic stones. And this is a detail, and I suddenly thought, I've never shown this work. I haven't even exhibited it. People come and occasionally buy a piece from me. But I thought, okay, I'm just going to show this. So everything you see there is a pattern around a stone, in a stone, and on a stone. And this is a detail. So really was wonderful to make it, very hard to make it. And I'm just showing a few artworks. This is water creating the apex of the human heart. And this is water creating heart. And this was a very hard drawing for me to make, and it's very intense. And it was when I realized that water is the most aggressive creative medium on this earth. Water and fire, but I chose water. So, and that's a fact. What we have to do is stop doing what we're doing, and things will regenerate really quickly. Now, there's ways that we have to do things in the urban environment to help that along. We have to, because there's not the space and everything. So, and a lot of landscape architects have figured out how to do that. Where am I? Here I am. There's another. So recently I was restricted because I broke a bone, and I had learned sumi painting when I was in Japan in 1960, and I went back to it. I never had done it since, and I found myself going back to it, and I think it's something about the primary directness of the medium that attracted me. But I have 9 principles of water and they aren't design principles, though somebody wanted to take over and make them all design principles. She's a landscape practitioner, and I said no. So then it's water, there's a text with them, water creates complexity. This is water creates quantum coherence. So every mammal, from the whale to the bird, has the same heart structure. So you could find that through all the different species, you would find coherence. Why is that? That's water. For every species. Within the plant kingdom too, it would be the same thing. Small to large, they're coherent. Now, physics demands that it's only coherent if they can eliminate everything and prove it. So far, only electrical currents are coherent or something like that. But biophysics is changing that reality. Keep up with it. Just keep up with it a little bit, and you'll have other design possibilities will come to you. As I said to Clive, we have to imagine things we've never been able to imagine in order to face climate chaos. We have to. So this one is all water's connected. This is water naturally rejuvenates itself, which it does until it's so polluted that it can't. And eventually even the most polluted water, if we stop polluting it, will come back. That's the inherent nature of the whole situation in which we live, is that it's innately robust, wants to be robust, but we keep saying, oh, I'll box it here, I'll box it there, I want to control it here. And that's destroyed the system. So how do we, in facing climate chaos, reconnect the systems? That's your challenge. How do we reconnect the systems in the face of climate chaos? Okay. Water never moves in a straight line. Imagine what we did when we piped every bit. Buried the pipes. We pipe everything. Everything we can pipe. That's a one-line solution instead of, no, don't pipe it, put it back in the ground. Hold it here, make places. And they used to do that a long time ago, say on the Mississippi or the Yangtze. When they flooded, they had huge, kilometers of a ditch that the water went into, and then it provided, the sediment provided farmland for the next 20 years. Now we've straightened, and the floods are unbelievable. Every time you straighten something like water like that, you could build the wall as high as you want, and it'll still flood. That, because it's not moving in a straight line, it will gather speed and go up over that flood wall just like that. Whereas if we designed for capacity and flow, it would be okay. And that can all be modeled. We can do that. What else do we have? This water is primarily always a vortex. And this is my favorite thing. Guess what? Life adapts to water. Water doesn't adapt to life. And it's pretty much the same as if all the insects die, we'll die. But if we die, the insects will thrive. So get it right in your brain. We are totally dependent on the life systems. They die, we die. It might take 100 years or 200 years or whatever, and actually, whatever's going to happen, if we don't act now, they consider what it was 12 years last year. We now have 11 years to implement enough things to stop the climate from rising too high. And it's not all up to energy. And it's Diana Beresford-Kreuger. If you really want to read a fun book, The Global Forest is fantastic. She's a pithy, short writer. Chapters are never longer than 3-4 pages. But she said, if we planted a tree a year for every single human being on this planet, within 6 years, we would reverse climate change. Now, we can plant trees, right? It's not so hard. But it's harder than I thought to get people to do it. The Indians just planted 1 billion trees with a huge amount of people in 1 week. The Chinese have done it. So I put this in here instead of at the end, but what they've proven is that water has consciousness, sensitivity, flexibility. It also responds to electromagnetic fields. Have we disturbed the electromagnetic fields? Yeah, we have. We have. So in China, you can ask me questions. I'll leave a lot of things unanswered, but I ended up being able to go to China to do public art. Now, the Chinese government had forbidden public art, and they had forbidden working with foreigners. So later, if it's a question, I'll tell you how I got there. But I did go. I got an anonymous phone call from someone who didn't tell me who she was or why she was funding me. She said, I'm thinking of funding you. And I spilled my guts to her about having brainstormed public art on the Yangtze River. And she gave me $15,000, no proposal. My friends raised another $9,000, and I went to China with $24,000 in a money belt around my waist and no permission. We ended up doing public art on the river. They were the only green plan in China, which I think was really the thing that made it possible. And this river used to wash silk clean, and it was just full of pollution and filth. So when we did washing silk in the Jinjiang River, the public officials and everybody were standing on the banks cheering. And they had told me that if we like what you do, we'll invite you back, because they'd already asked me to do a part, and it was a street side conversation, nothing serious. But when I said, why don't you make a part to teach your citizens how nature cleans water, they looked at me and said, can you do that? And I completely lied, said yes. Theoretically it was possible. And I actually had to go to the Netherlands and to check out my ideas. I knew that I didn't know how to design anything larger than a sculpture the size of this room, maybe that room, so having a landscape architect would help me. That happened. But the other one is called Washing Ice, and Yin Zhoujin has become a very famous international artist. She's the one I would like to bring to Venice. She froze the water from the river and invited the public to wash it clean. The Chinese were so close to their ecosystems. Nobody in the United States gets that close. We'd be like, ooh, don't touch that. But they didn't have that at all. And the kids wanted to suck on this, and the old people would take it to their homes. And so we had to have a guard. And it melted for 3 days and was a hub of poetry and writing and discussion. So anyway, there were 25 events on this one section in Chengdu. You might know. Yeah. But that wasn't where the Living Water Garden is. So then these children, middle schoolers, wrote a letter. Their professor took them out and they wrote a letter to the mayor saying, why don't you clean up the river? And that became the 5-year plan in this city. It was opposed by the central government as bad economic development. They moved 100,000 people to housing. Of course, everyone in the world thought it would have been terrible housing. It was good housing. And they designed public land, park spaces. No economic development, restaurants, hotels, cinemas, nothing like that. There's not one development in the United States that is that good. Not one. The San Antonio River Walk destroyed the river. They now have had to change that. The San Antonio River Walk is a model for city development and economic development and good design. It's terrible. It's terrible. You know, Las Vegas too is a world model. It's awful. The LA River, I found out the Chinese were using our Army Corps of Engineers book on what to do with rivers from 1942. We still have the same thing. Take down all the trees, concrete the whole damn thing. That's what they do. So anyway, the mayor, they did decide to clean up the river, and that was their 5-year plan, to clean up the river, make a green an emerald belt in the center of the city, and they were having a hard time knowing what to do. So I did walk into a sympathetic situation, and but it looked like this. Every one of those is a toilet. Now all 53 kinds of fish. You couldn't fish anymore. So everyone used to live off the river. Within 30 years, it was dead and gone. So this is the plan. If I don't explain things enough, ask me, because I'm so used to talking about it, I get a little tired. like I just go, you know. But we built it in, fundamentally we built it in a year, way too fast. That would never happen anywhere else. Did you know? And so this is an aerial view right after it was just opened. The water was taken from the river, passes through a settling pond, it goes down aeration. They built Those are settling ponds. They put a garage underneath. That's how they got the city to agree. I said to them that there's a big hole, and I got there, and my son John said, "This is exciting," and I said, "I'm scared. I'm terrified. Let's go talk. What's this hole doing here?" So we go talk to this big puffed up engineer. He had a lot of money. He says, "Oh, I really know how to build things." I said, "Do you know how to build a parking garage strong enough to hold a wetland?" "Oh, no problem." Well, he fucked up. He did not build the top of the garage strong enough. We lost 3 feet when they had to put another thing on top of the garage. The garage always leaks, so did they ever really use it? No. But and redesign on the run because it wasn't in the blueprints. Everything was calculated, the slope, everything was calculated for what it was without that garage. And the water flow and everything. And actually, most people, other than me and the hydraulic engineer, don't understand that. And so this is the park after many years. It's most alive place. When you're inside it, you cannot tell you're in a great big city. Kingfishers came back within 3 months to fish in it. And I mean, in spite of mistakes and everything else, now why does it work that way? Can anyone answer that? Why? Why is it so alive? The waters are all connected. There is no separation for a fountain. There's no pond that has its own system. Then all the waters are connected. Now, if you don't connect all the waters, they will, either you have to constantly feed it fresh water or the toxins bioaccumulate. And so I'll show you Living Forest Park where the engineer did the opposite, and it's dying. But this park just doesn't, no matter what abuse it has, it doesn't die. It wasn't cared for, it's had mayors who hated it. It's, unfortunately right now it houses Jane Goodall's Roots and Shoots program, and people are using it again as a learning place for the environment. But, I mean, it's sort of, and local people would say, "Betsy, don't put your heart in this, it won't last, they'll ruin it," but I did it anyway. And the other thing about this park is it has system, now actually in fact, they engineered this wrong and they never corrected it. The government told me they couldn't get them to correct it, so they still take river water, but it isn't taken with the wheels. So for a long time, the place was a place where everyone came to play mahjong and cards and have tea, and that's a tea house, and things weren't constructed great, but I don't think that happens that way anymore. This is a sculpture. Again, they installed it instead of for a 4-ton sculpture, a 40-ton, and so they put it up too high, but okay, so what? It's the eye of the fish. It's a living water drop. I've designed a lot of them. I wish I could get, now with all the knowledge I have, to one more time make a living water drop fountain. The flow forms take the water from up here all the way down. They're super beneficial. Scientifically, they haven't been able to measure why these give life, whereas water going down a step system doesn't, but I've seen the test sites in the Netherlands. And you use this where water is moving in a vortex motion. Life just loves it. And it's not only about the amount of oxygen, it's about the biodynamics inherent in water. So anytime you can move water like this, however you do it, you have exponentially increased the biodynamism of a certain situation, large or small. Just spilling water, having it go down a step system doesn't do it. It will measure the right amount of dissolved oxygen, but it still doesn't do it. And that, to me, is very important information. There's a few more. I had to design it myself because John Wilkes from your Emerson University wanted a ton of money. And we didn't have a ton of money. Kids are all over it. I mean, they are, well, I don't know, I lost whatever, the picture where they're all over it. In the beginning, children made the signs. I mean, this whole park had an evolution. And although everything was calculated, like the amount of fish, the kids came along and said, I'm going to help the park, and they dump other fish in it. And I'd stand there with the head of the engineering, and he was a long marcher, and he said, you know, our children have nothing, so let's watch what they do, and then we'll adapt. It was really pretty, and for a while it was a science lab for schools and everything. It would be worth it to build a bunch as teaching places, because it really, really teaches you. The Chinese who came, and there's 7 different kinds of plants here, all calculated for what toxins they remove, and it's sequential. So the lemna is first, and duck liked lemma, so we had a lot of little ducks eating lemna. And people were all over the park. Children would come in with water masks and say, watch me, and they'd swim as much as they could. So anyway, I just left all these in. And then the biggest discussion was this, where I said, take down the flood control walls, and the flood control will be back there. And you know, our brains are so fixed. So the Chinese brain when the engineer was 75, and he was going to make it look like the concrete places in Los Angeles. And there were this huge argument, you're taking land away from the people. Like the wall there would provide all this land back to here, right? They couldn't imagine that the people would use the steps and go down to the river, and there was no land taken away from the people. And after everyone saw it, they were like, we should do this everywhere. But like all cities, they plan way in advance, and they won't change their plans. One thing I'll say is this area had been in blueprint designed by the landscape design company the government was working with, and they took that away from them and gave it for this project. And that landscape design company never forgave. I mean, they didn't want to build it. And they wrote letters saying it's not going to work. And the bioengineer wrote 35 letters saying, let's make it real. And he won. I mean, I couldn't write those letters. I had no voice. So anyway, and at the end of the park, which isn't functioning anymore, was this celebration sculpture that they could slide down and climb on. And there was a big pool of water in there. And of course, people brought their bikes in to wash them, or their children to wash them. So all of that did take place, but still the park functioned. And the Premier of China didn't like this park. In theory, he said it's bad economic development. He came 2 years later and declared it the best thing that happened to China. And after that, what people took from it was the wetlands. A lot of the rest they didn't take. But I would go to university and say, see, we copied you. Well, they had a wetland tertiary treatment system. So it took years before I was asked, tell me everything you know that you put into this park. And when I was trying to talk about it at building, it was flat, nothing. But 10 years later, we ended up having, and it's all on videotape, like 6-hour conversation. Like the flow forms do this, and the sequence is this, and everything. So that's the guy. He's fabulous. So I'll go for it. Okay. So this is just against how single-purpose design is at the heart of our materialistic imperative. Make it as simple as possible, be able to replicate it, and I know you're up against all that as designers also. So, but that's got to change yesterday, last year or 10 years ago. So the companies that took up integrated design 20 years ago had trouble surviving. But I think now it's pretty much, you can do it. I'm not sure, because I jumped out. I worked in the Beijing Bureau I got a job in the Beijing Bureau of Hydraulic Engineering and Research. I have no qualifications other than the living water garden. I mean, I didn't go to school in anything. But think about it, it's not rocket science. It is not rocket science. It's common sense. Why would you plant a single species? Of course, then you have to have, all kinds of chemicals to keep it alive. species are interconnected. They like to live together. So anyhow, this was a concrete river, and he put, mesh on it, planted it. It cleans up the river not to have edible fish in it, and it was completely dirty. So he said to me, look, and he took me to see it. Look what I did, because that's what I was I was there to teach ecological design. And this is another place in downtown Beijing, the most constricted river they have. And I told them, design interaction, design. Now, I didn't get to design any of this, and they just took me to show the results. In fact, I walked every river, and almost all of them got destroyed. But in the end, really interesting. Tons of variation, plants, interconnection. It's amazing. And that's downtown Beijing. You'll never get to see these anywhere else. It would be impossible. Okay, so going forward a little bit, I don't know if this is helpful or not helpful. This was the park that I wrote the integrated design for the Planning Bureau, which people had to be in conversation with each other because everything's vertically organized. So what happens if you get these people talking to each other? And I diagrammed it. I made friends with the woman who was head of all the Olympic planning, every contract. So and they would give me projects, and then I'd go to a Chinese company to do together. Although this was mostly some USers, but that was the place. This is a park. That's an ancient canal from 200 years ago, the leftover. That was the town supply of water. And so what we did was, there was this temple that was 2,000 years old. Again, the person from the US is like, this should be a quiet place. Let's design to protect it. Well, the temples were the place where everybody met. They were the markets. That was where you went. So, that's how off it can be if you're not from the culture. And, but we made that, where the temple is right there, we made that into a reflecting pool. The kind of connection between the two, which isn't here at all, we made into a cleaning system. We turned the middle pond into a collection of clean water to distribute to the housing nearby, because historically, this never got built, by the way. And so there's the temple. Then we took the storm waters from all around, cleaned it up in a series of bioswales, and sent it to the central pond. And it was enough water to distribute to a pretty big proportion of this little city. The city at that time was only 500,000, and it didn't have enough water as it was. But now they've gone ahead and made it a big city of 5 million. So they didn't do this. And all those little dot things were gray water treatment, gray water pipes, gray water collection area, the same up there. And I'm just showing it because it's a clear example of integrating street and park and resource and everything else. And I do think there are very few people who do this, who even think to do this. But it's actually what we need to do. And so water scarcity comes up when everything goes into a pipe into a river. When we don't repurpose rainwater, you have water scarcity. And the water scarcity stuff in all these cities is pretty much just bad planning, wherever they happen to be. So anyhow, that's the final one, and that's all the areas where we collected from, and then right here in the orange is the new development where the waters would go to. And that's a myth. I mean, Beijing drawings and planners were always showing huge water areas where there was no water. Or they would sell the same amount of water to 10 different developers. So you see a lot of empty water features in housing complexes. And when I first went to Beijing, I was taken to where the water created the best rice. where the empress used to go to bathe. All those things are gone. Even the stories are gone. The western side of the city was called Haidian, 10,000 wells, and it was where the water carriers would deliver the water to the city. It's totally gone. There is no water in the hills anymore. You can't find one river. They are sourcing water from neighboring cities that are objecting to that reality. They don't want to give them water. So this is another project where we did circulate all the water again, and it was again for Beijing. So most cities are, it probably includes London, you take the water, whether it's groundwater, rainwater, river water, it goes to the city and it gets discharged as waste. And it's not recycled into the city. Now, our future probably depends on each community becoming unto itself sustainable. So that you figure out what is the rightful water to a place. Not how much you can build and then take it from far away, but what water is this place have? How much rainwater does it have? Is there an aquifer? How much of the river water can you take and still share it? All that. Now, very water low places have to recycle everything. But water profligate places, even in the United States and maybe here, take it all so much for granted that they're also having drinking water issues, which they shouldn't have. So anyway, am I telling you anything new? No. Oh, what? You can say no or yes. Anyway, so we designed the whole thing to recycle everything. And all I'm going to